The girl with empty pockets was known to no one by name, yet everyone had seen her at least once, darting between crates behind the market, crouching near broken barrels, or slipping into the shadows as city guards stomped past. Her name was Nara, though she rarely heard it spoken aloud. She lived in a cracked, soot-stained alley wedged behind the market square, a place where broken crates and spoiled vegetables piled like forgotten thoughts. The stone walls around her were chipped and watermarked, the bricks crooked, as if the buildings themselves had given up trying to stand tall in such a place. Nara had no shoes. Her feet were tough and calloused, shaped by years of walking on uneven cobbles and shards of discarded glass. Her hair hung in tangled ropes around her face, always smelling faintly of smoke and dust. Her clothes were stitched from what others had thrown away, a faded tunic once blue now the color of ash and a coat missing its buttons held closed with a string she'd tied herself. Each morning before the sun could properly warm the streets, Nara would rise from her makeshift nest of blankets and newspapers, yawn into her hands and step out into the world with a practiced quietness. She did not beg, at least not with words. Instead, she lingered near the stalls as the merchants unpacked their wares, waiting for what they might drop or forget. Her eyes were always open for a bruised pear, a crust of bread tossed aside, or a fish head the monger didn't want. It wasn't much, but she made it enough. She survived on scraps and stories whispered by other street children, or overheard from gossiping vendors. Tales of hidden rooms behind bakery ovens, of secret riches buried beneath the old statue, of a prince who once disguised himself as a pauper. But the one thing Nara returned to every day without fail was the baker's shop. Nestled at the corner of the market square, the bakery stood like a hearth in the heart of winter. Its golden windows glowed with the heat of the ovens inside. Each morning, fresh loaves were placed on trays behind the glass, round and brown with crisp crusts, braided with sugar or speckled with poppy seeds. The smell alone could lift Nara's soul, draw her like a moth to the flame. She never dared step too close. Guards patrolled the market square and the baker was known to shout, but she would find her usual spot across the alley, behind an overturned barrel and watch. Sometimes she closed her eyes and imagined biting into a slice still warm from the oven. There was no warmth in the city for someone like Nara. Cold was not just in the wind, but in the eyes of the people who passed her. If she lingered too long, shopkeepers would shout. If she approached too closely, mothers would clutch their children's hands tighter. The poor were not seen as unfortunate, they were seen as dangerous. Every missing apple, every snatched purse, every faint cry in the night was blamed on someone who looked like her. And Nara, with her tangled hair and empty hands, looked the part. Even so, she gave what she could. If another child cried because they were lost, Nara would walk with them until they found their way. If an old man dropped a coin while haggling at a stall, she would scoop it up and place it gently in his hand before slipping away. She had no possessions to give, no bread, no blankets, no roof over her head, but she gave time, kindness, and careful silence. One afternoon, as the wind picked up and the sky began to pale into dusk, Nara noticed a girl no older than 5 sitting against a stone wall, sobbing into her hands. Her dress was neat, her shoes still polished. She was not from the alley. Nara approached slowly. "You're lost," she said, not asking but knowing. The girl looked up, startled. Her cheeks were wet. "I can't find my mama." "What's her name?" "Lisa." Nara offered her hand. "Come on. Let's find her." They wandered the market square for nearly an hour. The girl didn't talk much and Nara didn't press. They walked past baskets of oranges, through the fishmonger's lane, beneath the awnings of spice sellers. Just when the child's feet began to drag, a frantic woman burst from the crowd and threw her arms around the girl, sobbing. "Thank the stars," she cried. The woman looked up at Nara, eyes wide, and said, "How did you?" But Nara was already gone. That night, she slept with a fuller heart than stomach. She had only eaten half a carrot and 2 wilted leaves of cabbage, but her dreams were peaceful. She imagined herself in a kitchen with golden walls, warm bread in her hands and no one to chase her away. But mornings did not honor dreams. The next day, as Nara made her way to the bakery's edge, she noticed 2 guards standing outside the alley. They weren't looking at her, but they were near enough to make her heart quicken. She ducked behind a cart and waited. The baker emerged, dusting flour from his apron, and handed the guards a wrapped parcel of something still steaming. They laughed, said something Nara couldn't hear, then walked off, crumbs already spilling from the paper. The baker looked around once, briefly, and then went back inside. Nara crept forward again. Inside the bakery it was always warm. Even from the street, she could feel it, the heat from the ovens pushing against the windows, carrying with it the scent of butter, yeast, and cinnamon. She watched through the side window as the baker pulled a tray of rolls from the oven. One fell. He didn't pick it up. Nara's stomach tensed. She waited. 1 minute. 2. Then she approached the back of the shop. There, near the step, lay the fallen roll. She reached for it, hand trembling. Nara. She froze. The voice was low but not unkind. The baker stood in the doorway, arms crossed. He had flour in his beard and creases in his eyes. For a moment she thought he might shout. But he didn't. You've been watching my shop every day for weeks, he said. She didn't move. Didn't speak. He sighed. You never steal. You never beg. You just watch. Still Nara said nothing. He bent down and picked up the roll. It's still good, he muttered. Then to her surprise he broke it in half and held out one piece. Nara blinked. Her hand lifted as if unsure of its own movement. She took the half roll, warm and soft. Next time just knock, the baker said. And then he turned away, leaving the door ajar. Nara stared at the half roll in her hand. It steamed in the chill air. Slowly she took a bite. The flavor was almost too much, rich, sweet, and filled with something she'd never tasted before: hope. For the rest of the day she did not hide behind crates. She walked the market with her chin a little higher, the warmth of the bread lingering in her belly. The city was still cold. Suspicion still lurked in every alley. But for one morning, someone had seen her. Not as a thief. Not as a nuisance. But as a girl with a name. A girl with empty pockets and something more. And so she kept returning to the bakery. Sometimes there was a crust left near the door. Other times nothing. But the door was never locked when she passed. And slowly the city, just a corner of it, began to soften. One loaf at a time. Rain had a way of flattening the city. It dulled the sound of footsteps, dragged the colors from the buildings, and made even the wealthiest corners look like faded sketches. Puddles gathered in every uneven crack, filling the alleyways and pooling at the edges of the square. Nara stood beneath the sagging overhang of an abandoned fruit stall, hair plastered to her face, watching as the city sloshed by. Her tunic clung to her thin frame. Water dripped from her sleeves and ran down her legs into the holes of her soles. Even for someone used to discomfort, this morning was cruel. She hadn't eaten since the day before, and that had only been a shriveled turnip stolen from a broken crate. Hunger had returned with a cruel edge, curling her stomach into knots. She watched as merchants struggled to cover their wares, tarps flapping in the wind. Even in the rain, the bakery smelled like gold, yeast and sugar and salt mingling with the wet air, wrapping around her like a cruel joke. Nara crept forward, her steps slow and quiet. She wasn't close, never too close, but close enough to see the steam rising from the loaves set out on display behind the open shutters. A plump woman in a hood bought two, tucking them into her basket. A boy with red sleeves grabbed a roll and ran. Master Rennell, the bakery's owner, shouted after him but didn't give chase. The boy disappeared into the crowd, laughing. Then Nara saw it happen. A roll tumbled from a tray. No one noticed. It fell and landed against the edge of the wooden cart. Nara's breath caught. She stepped toward it, just a few paces, barely beyond the edge of the canopy. Her bare feet splashed through a puddle. She crouched, reached out, not even touching the bread yet. And a voice snapped through the rain. There she is. The shout cracked across the square. Heads turned. Nara froze, her hand still outstretched, though she hadn't touched the bread. Master Rennell stormed forward, his apron soaked, his face flushed with fury. He was a big man with hands like shovels and a reputation as unbending as iron. His brows were drawn tight, mouth twisted into a frown that looked permanent. "Thief," he roared. "You little rat." "I saw her hanging about the cart all morning," someone added from the crowd. "She's always lurking." "She took it," another voice cried. "I saw her with the bread." Nara backed away, eyes wide. She hadn't taken it. The roll was still lying in the same spot. But truth didn't matter, not when suspicion was already stoked like fire. Rennell reached her in 3 strides. "Where is it?" he demanded. "Give it back." She shook her head. Rain ran into her eyes. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her fingers clutched at the string around her neck. A small worn wooden locket swayed there, dull and scratched. Her thumb pressed it like it might shield her from the storm. "Empty hands mean nothing," Rennell growled. "Where did you hide it?" "She's always skulking around," someone shouted again. "You let one of them go hungry long enough, they'll chew through the walls." The crowd was growing. People emerged from doorways and stalls, drawn by the commotion. Nara felt her body curling inward, shrinking. She had never taken the role. But it didn't matter. The fear in her chest was louder than her voice could ever be. A guard appeared, one of the regulars who patrolled the square. A man named Jorek, tall and tired-looking, with a wet hood covering half his face. He frowned at the crowd, then at Nara, then at Master Renal. "What's the trouble?" "She stole from me," Renal barked. "Again." "I didn't see her take anything," Jorek said slowly. "She was reaching for it when I caught her." "It's enough." "Bread's still there, isn't it?" Jorek asked, eyeing the fallen roll. "She threw it back when she saw me. You know what they're like, quick as snakes." The crowd murmured in agreement. Suspicion was easier to swallow than fairness. "Just look at her," someone said. "She's soaked through. Probably hasn't eaten in days. You think she wouldn't steal if she could?" Jorek's jaw tightened. His eyes flicked to Nara. She stared back, shivering. Her hands were white-knuckled around the wooden locket. She looked so small, almost not a person but a shadow of one. But she still said nothing. That silence, oh, that silence, it spoke louder than any confession. The city had no patience for silence from the poor. Jorek sighed and stepped forward. "Come on, girl," he said. "We've got to settle this." Nara didn't move. Renal grabbed her arm roughly. "You'll answer for this," he spat. "You and your kind always taking. We feed the city and you leech off of us." The pain in her shoulder was sharp, but she didn't cry out. The locket swung out from her chest, catching the rain. It was a simple thing carved from old cedar wood. No one knew what was inside. She'd never opened it in front of anyone. It was all she had left from her mother, given to her just before the sickness took her. The locket was her anchor, her prayer, her name when no one else remembered it. The guard reached her other arm. Between them they pulled her forward, through the puddles, into the growing ring of faces. "Stand her up," Renal ordered. "Let everyone see what she is." "She's just a child," muttered someone near the edge of the crowd. "A child who steals," another corrected. Jorek didn't look comfortable. But he didn't stop. Duty dulled a man after long enough. He stood Nara in the center of the square, rain pouring down her face, and stepped back. Master Renal turned to the crowd. "This is what becomes of leniency," he declared. "You feed rats, they bite your hand." "She's hungry," someone whispered. "We're all hungry," Renal snapped. "But we don't all steal." Nara's legs trembled. Her vision swam, not from tears but from the sick, boiling fear in her gut. She didn't want to cry, not here, not now, but her body betrayed her. A tear slid down her cheek and vanished in the rain. "Speak," Renal said. "Did you take it or not?" Nara opened her mouth. No sound came. She looked down at the locket. "Silence is guilt," he said. Jorek turned toward her. There was hesitation in his eyes now, but he reached for the rod at his side, the short, polished baton carried by guards. "She'll learn," Renal said. "The city teaches its lessons. Better now than when she's grown and bolder." Nara flinched. The locket in her hand felt hot, though it was cold. She closed her eyes. She had done nothing. But the truth could not protect her, not in this city, not in this rain. The baton raised. Then a voice, soft but firm, cut through the drizzle. "Wait." The crowd parted. A woman stepped forward, umbrella in hand, cloak fine but not gaudy. Her eyes were sharp, her face familiar. Nara blinked. It was the mother, the same woman whose daughter Nara had helped find 2 weeks earlier. She stepped between the guard and Nara. "I saw her that day. My little one was crying, and this girl brought her to me without asking for anything. She could have taken my purse and run. But she didn't. She didn't touch a thing. She just vanished." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "You trust her word?" Renal snapped. "Over mine?" "I trust my eyes," the woman said coolly. "And I trust the instincts of a child. My daughter said she felt safe with her." Jorek hesitated. "I don't say she's innocent of today," the woman added. "I say you're about to punish someone whose only crime is being cold and hungry and unseen." Nara looked up, eyes wide. She didn't understand it. Why had this woman stepped in? Why now? Renal growled. "This is madness." The woman turned to Jorek. "You're the guard. You decide." Jorek looked between them, Renal righteous and fuming, Nara trembling and soaked, the woman calm and unmoving. Then he sighed and lowered the baton. "I didn't see her steal. And I don't punish children for being hungry." He turned to Nara. "Go." She didn't move. "Go," he repeated, softer. Nara stepped back slowly. Then she turned and ran, not stopping even when she slipped on the wet stone. Her breath came fast and sharp. Her locket bounced against her chest as though reminding her she was still real. She didn't stop until she reached the alley, dark and quiet and safe. There, with her back against the wall, she sank down and curled into herself, the rain still falling but no longer reaching her. She hadn't spoken. She hadn't fought. But someone had seen her. And this time it had been enough. The baton hovered, cold steel poised midair, reflecting the gray light of the rainy sky. Nara's eyes were shut tight. She waited, her breath hitched, her knees about to buckle under the weight of shame and fear. Her hand clutched the locket as though it might shield her from the sting of wood and iron. She had never known a beating before, not officially. She had been shoved, kicked, spat at, but never struck in front of so many. Never like this. Jorek the guard looked uncertain. His grip on the baton wavered. The crowd pressed in around the square, hoods slick with rain, faces blurred beneath dripping brims. Reynolds stood behind him, full of fire, ready to see justice done. His arms were crossed, jaw tight, eyes filled with an anger too old to belong to this moment. It was bigger than one roll of bread. Bigger than one girl. He saw something in Nara that enraged him, perhaps the refusal to disappear. Then just before the baton fell, a voice rang out, thin, dry but cutting through the murmur like a knife. That child saved my life. The guard stopped. The crowd turned. A space opened slowly as the speaker hobbled forward. She was small and hunched, her shoulders cloaked in wool so damp it clung to her back like a second skin. Her hair was white, thin as threads, escaping from beneath a crooked bonnet. Her face was a roadmap of creases, pale and wet with rain, but her eyes were alert. "Speak clearly, old mother," Reynolds barked, irritated. "This is no time for stories." She pointed a gnarled finger at Nara. "That girl found me last winter near the south wall. I'd fallen. Do you remember how cold that week was? Ice on the wells, frost like glass on the market signs? I hadn't eaten in 2 days. My coat had been stolen." Some in the crowd nodded. They remembered that winter. Bitter, biting and long. "I was there, curled up in the alley behind Harwin's forge, too frozen to stand. And she," the woman took a shaky breath, "she came to me, gave me her coat. A ragged thing but warm. Then she gave me the crust of bread she'd been saving. She didn't say anything. Just left it and walked away." Nara's eyes widened. She remembered. She hadn't known the woman's name. Just that she'd looked like a bundle of rags in the snow, barely breathing. Nara had walked away fast afterward, afraid she'd done something foolish, something dangerous. But she'd done it anyway. Reynolds narrowed his eyes. "What does that have to do with today?" "She gave up her food," the woman said softly. "For someone she didn't know. Someone who couldn't repay her. If that's not the opposite of a thief, I don't know what is." The crowd grew quiet. Even the rain seemed to hush for a moment. "She's good," the old woman said. "You just don't see it." "Enough of this," Reynolds snapped. "Your memory's soft. That may have happened, or it may be a lie. But it doesn't change what we saw. She was reaching for my bread. That's fact." "She didn't touch it," the guard said almost reluctantly. "She was going to." The old woman shook her head, slow and certain. "You don't know that." Reynolds turned to her, scowling. "You think kindness once excuses everything? That we should hand out loaves to every urchin with a sob story?" "No," the woman said. "But maybe we should hand out fewer punishments to the ones who've done no harm." There was a long silence. The rain softened, a lazy drizzle now, as if even the clouds were listening. Finally Reynolds huffed. "I won't beat her. Not if there's doubt. But I won't let it go either. A lesson still needs teaching." Jorek, his baton still in hand, looked at Reynolds warily. "What do you mean?" "She can work off the cost," Reynolds said. "A loaf, a roll, whatever she thought she'd take. Let her learn the weight of what it means to take from another. Let her scrub the floors, wash the trays. She's small, but she's not made of glass." "And if she didn't take anything?" the old woman asked. She still hovered, lingered. "You can't let shadows gather too long in one place." He turned to Nara. "You want to prove yourself good? Then work. Earn something. Let's see what kind of girl you really are." The crowd began to drift apart, the drama ending without violence. Some nodded in approval. Others muttered under their breath. But no one raised a hand in protest. Nara stood frozen, her hands still tight around the locket. Jorek looked at her. "You understand?" She nodded once. Her throat was dry. Her shoulders ached with tension, but she forced herself to straighten. "Come tomorrow at dawn," Reynolds said. "Don't be late. And don't try to slip anything past me, girl. You're not owed trust." The old woman gave Nara a faint, sad smile. Hold your head high, child. Not for them. For you. Nara didn't speak, but she held the woman's gaze for a moment, something silent and strong passing between them. She turned and walked away, not quickly, not running, but with a kind of tired grace. Each step felt heavier than the last. Her soaked clothes clung to her sides. The alley was not far, but it felt a world away. As she turned the corner and the square vanished behind her, the tension in her shoulders finally unwound. She slumped against a crumbling wall and slid to the ground. It was not guilt that made her agree. It wasn't the weight of accusation or the sting of embarrassment. It was something older. Something deeper. She had lived her whole life being invisible, being blamed, being mistaken for something lesser. And now she had a chance, however small, however undeserved, to enter a world that had always kept its doors closed to her. To stand inside the bakery. To feel warmth from within the walls instead of from across the street. To show that even if her pockets were empty, her hands could still carry worth. She would work. Not for forgiveness. For herself. For the child who had led a lost girl to her mother. For the old woman who remembered kindness. For every silent, hungry night that had made her into this quiet, trembling thing. Tomorrow she would step inside the bakery. She would face Reynolds' narrowed eyes and his suspicions and his orders. She would scrub the counters and carry the ash from the ovens. She would feel the ache of effort in her fingers. And through it all she would not bow her head. Because the truth wasn't that she had been saved. The truth was, even now, even in chains of duty, even with nothing left but her locket and her name, she had chosen. And no one could take that from her. The bakery was darker than Nara had imagined. The morning sun barely touched the interior, and what little light filtered through the shutters was quickly swallowed by soot and flour dust. The ovens lined the back wall like sleeping beasts, their mouths yawning wide with heat, their breath thick with smoke and fire. The air smelled of yeast and singed wood, sweet and bitter all at once. It wrapped around her like a second skin. She stepped inside just after dawn, her hands scrubbed raw with well water, her tunic patched at the knees. Reynolds met her at the door, his expression hard, his arms already dusted with flour. He looked her over once, eyes moving from her damp hair to her bare feet. "You're late." "I'm not," she replied quietly. He grunted but didn't argue. He shoved a bucket into her hands. "Start with the floors. No sweeping water and scrub. You miss a corner, you do the whole thing twice." She nodded and got to work. The first few hours passed in silence. Nara scrubbed until her fingers ached, her knees bruised from kneeling on the uneven stone floor. She wiped counters, carried ash from the ovens, hauled water from the back well. Reynolds barked orders and barely looked at her except to correct a mistake or snatch a rag from her hands. The work was hard and the air inside the bakery never cooled. Even in the early hours, the heat clung to every surface like a second fire. But Nara did not complain. She moved like a shadow, silent and steady. She'd grown up watching the bakery from the outside. She'd imagined what it might feel like to be inside, to stand near the ovens, to smell the bread from within the walls instead of from the cold street. Now she was here, and though the walls were rough and the air stung her throat, she refused to let it crush her. She finished cleaning before noon, and Reynolds sent her to the back, where sacks of flour waited beside clay jars of salt and dried herbs. She was told to measure, sift, and mix, her hands covered in white dust by the hour's end. At first she simply followed instructions. He showed her how to knead, how to shape, how to score the dough before placing it into the oven. But then something strange began to happen. By the second day, Nara found herself touching the dough not like a task but like a memory. Her fingers moved with familiarity she couldn't explain. She began to shape loaves without thinking, braided, twisted, nestled into trays with gentle precision. She added tiny pinches of herb and spice when no one was looking, never too much, just enough to awaken something in the flavor. And when the loaves came out of the ovens, golden and steaming, they smelled different. Better. The first customer who noticed was a gray-haired man who came every morning for the same rye roll. He took one bite then paused. He looked down at it, confused. "This isn't the usual," he said. Reynolds frowned from behind the counter. "Same recipe." The man shrugged, took another bite and nodded. "Well, whatever changed, keep it." Others began to murmur too. The crusts were crisper, the inside softer. The cinnamon rolls, once dense, now melted on the tongue. The walnut loaves had a warmth to them that hadn't been there before. People asked what had changed, and Reynolds would grunt or say nothing or claim a new supplier. But he knew the truth. He was watching her. He began assigning her only menial tasks. He pulled her from the ovens, limited her mixing to exact measurements. When she kneaded, he stood over her and corrected her grip, even when it was already perfect. But it didn't stop the change. Somehow, even under his watchful eye, the dough responded to her hands. It rose faster. It browned more evenly. The crust seemed to open just so. It unsettled him. On the 5th morning, he came in early to watch her prepare a batch of flatbreads. She didn't know he was standing behind the shelves, half-shadowed. She thought she was alone, and in the quiet, her humming began. A low, simple tune. Soft. Familiar. At first Reynolds didn't notice it. He only heard a few notes, half-formed, like the hum of a kettle in another room. But then the melody curved upward, gentle and slow, and it caught something deep inside him, something long buried. He stepped out from behind the shelves, breath caught in his throat. Nara didn't see him. She was shaping dough into small spirals, her thumbs working quickly. The tune spilled from her lips without thought, a lullaby barely louder than the rustle of flour. She hummed it like she'd always known it, like it had been stitched into her skin. Reynolds' heart slammed in his chest. He hadn't heard that melody since he was a boy. It was his mother's song. A lullaby sung only within the walls of their narrow home, in a distant town now forgotten. It wasn't a common tune, not one sung in the city streets. And yet, this girl, this strange barefoot girl, hummed it with perfect cadence. Nara, he said too loud. She jumped and turned, nearly dropping the dough. Where did you learn that? He asked, stepping closer. She blinked. I don't know. I just hum it sometimes. That song, he said sharply. Where? I've always known it, I think. That's not an answer. I don't have one, she said, her voice soft. He stared at her. Her face was pale, eyes wide. The locket around her neck glinted in the oven light, swinging slightly. His gaze fell on it. What is that? He asked. It was my mother's. He stepped forward. Let me see it. She stepped back. I'm not going to steal it, girl. He stopped himself. Open it. She hesitated. No one had ever asked her to do that. She hadn't opened it herself in years. Her fingers found the clasp and turned it. The wood creaked and the locket opened with a soft snap. Inside was a worn scrap of paper, curled with age. And on it, a tune. A short sequence of notes, carefully inked in a child's hand. 5 notes. The beginning of the lullaby. Reynolds stepped back as if struck. My mother wrote that, he whispered. Nara's fingers trembled. Your? He nodded. Before I came to the city. Before the bakery. That's her handwriting. I remember it. She stared at the locket, then at him. She gave me this when I was very small, she said. I don't remember her face. Only her voice. That song. Reynolds sat down heavily on the nearest stool. The bakery was suddenly too quiet, the ovens too loud. The past pressed in on him, thick and disorienting. He looked at Nara again, really looked. The sharp cheekbones. The curve of her jaw. The eyes. You were left at the temple doors, weren't you? He asked. She nodded slowly. Yes. The sister said I was found with this and a blanket. He rubbed his hands over his face. My sister left the city before the famine. She was pregnant. She swore she'd come back. I never heard from her again. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. You think? Nara began. I don't know what I think, Reynolds said. But that melody, her writing. He looked at her again. It's not proof. But it's something. Nara closed the locket gently and let it rest against her chest. Her hands were still covered in flour. She suddenly felt very small again, though not the kind of small she had been before. This was a different kind of small, a shift in the earth beneath her. Why did you hate me so much? She asked, voice small. Reynolds looked down. I didn't hate you. You did. He sighed. I hated what you reminded me of. Hunger. Powerlessness. Things I buried under work and heat and years of pretending I'd climbed out. And now. He didn't answer at first. Then, now I don't know who you are. I don't either, she said. Not yet. They were quiet again. The ovens crackled. The scent of rising dough filled the air. At last Reynolds stood. He didn't speak. He only turned and walked back toward the front of the bakery. Before he disappeared around the corner, he said, Keep working. You're good at it. Nara stared after him, heart racing. She returned to her task, but her hands moved slower. Not unsure, just newly aware. Something had changed. She was no longer just a girl with empty pockets. She was a thread in something much larger, a melody remembered, a name nearly lost, a story still unfolding in the heat of ovens and the shape of bread. And for the first time, the bakery didn't feel like a cage. It felt like the beginning of something whole. Reynolds stood in the darkened storeroom long after the ovens had cooled, His fingers dusted not with flour but ash and memory. The bakery was silent, save for the occasional groan of wood cooling after the long day's heat. Outside, the city wind tugged at the shutters, but he didn't hear it. His eyes were fixed on the open book in his lap, the pages brittle and yellowed, smelling of smoke and cloves. He had found it that morning in the crawlspace beneath his old cot, a narrow nook he hadn't touched in years. The book was bound in cracked leather, its spine worn to softness. Rennell of Northgate, son of Myrna. The name glared back at him in a sharp, delicate hand. His mother's. The script had not faded. It had only grown quieter over time, like her voice. He flipped carefully through the pages, each one filled with meticulous notes. Births, travels, favorite recipes, old family songs. His mother had written everything down as if the future depended on memory. There, between a notation on wheat yields and a syrup glaze, was the lullaby. Just the melody, 5 notes at the top of the page, the very ones Nara had hummed in the bakery. But below it, in his mother's spidery script. Asterisk, for my little fox, should I ever lose you. Asterisk. Rennell swallowed hard. He had forgotten that nickname. Little Fox. She used to call his sister that. Leora. Clever, sharp-eyed, full of mischief. She disappeared the winter before the famine, pregnant, stubborn, and too proud to stay in a city that couldn't feed her. She'd gone looking for something better. He'd assumed she died, like so many others. They never found a body. Just silence, like a door closed softly and never reopened. But Nara. That song. The locket. The face that mirrored Leora more than he dared admit. He closed the book and held it to his chest. He didn't know what frightened him more, that Nara might truly be Leora's child, or that he'd nearly punished her for a crime she didn't commit. A child. His blood. His family. The thought curdled in his chest. By the time the moon rose, he found himself standing outside the attic loft where Nara slept. She had not taken a real bed even after he'd offered her the cot. She preferred the warmth above the ovens, where the chimney heat curled between beams. He knocked, then pushed the hatch open without waiting for a reply. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor, combing flour from her sleeves. She looked up, startled. It's late. I know. Do you need something? Rennell stepped inside. The attic was small, lit by a single oil lamp. It smelled of cinnamon and smoke. He held out the book. What's that? She asked. Something old. Something I should have opened years ago. She took it gently, leafed through a few pages, then paused when she reached the song. Her fingers hovered above it. I don't know why I know it, she said, barely above a whisper. It's just always been with me. Like a thread in my bones. That song was my mother's, Rennell said. She only ever sang it to one other person. My sister. Nara looked up. Her eyes shimmered with confusion and something close to fear. My mother wrote this for her. She called her Little Fox. Said she would always come back. Nara's breath caught. Rennell's voice was gentler now. You were found with a wooden locket and a blanket. Do you remember anything else? She shook her head. Only a hand letting go. A woman's voice. A flame. Then cold. They sat in silence. The warmth of the ovens below crept through the floorboards. Finally, Nara asked, Do you think I'm her daughter? Rennell didn't answer. Instead, he looked down at his hands. I don't know. But I think, if she had a daughter, she would be like you. She swallowed. Why didn't she come back? She might have tried. His voice cracked slightly. But the roads were cruel that winter. Caravans were raided. Whole villages vanished in the snow. Maybe she made it as far as the outer woods. Maybe she left you because she had to. Then why me? Nara asked. Why did I survive? He looked up at her. Because someone wanted you to. That night, Rennell lay in his cot but did not sleep. The book sat open on his chest. The lullaby replayed in his mind over and over, the melody a key that kept unlocking the past. When he finally drifted off, sleep came hard and fast. And with it, the dream. He stood at the edge of the city, near the south wall, under a sky the color of ash. The air stank of smoke. In the distance, flames reached toward the sky, a farmhouse burning. The forest beyond pulsed with orange and red. People were running. Screams echoed like birds circling above a ruined field. He turned and saw her. Leora. Her dress was torn, her braid unspooled over one shoulder. She clutched something to her chest, a bundle wrapped in cloth, its face hidden. Baby. She stumbled toward the edge of the city, her face streaked with soot, her eyes wide with fear. She looked back once, then knelt beside a tree. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Rennell couldn't move, couldn't speak. He was only a witness, frozen in the shape of a man. She placed the bundle gently in a basket and set it at the edge of the road. Then she kissed its forehead, tucked something, a small wooden charm, inside and ran. Flames swallowed the edge of the woods behind her. The child did not cry. Then the vision shifted. The tree cracked in two, the ground quaked, and Rennell jolted awake. He sat up in bed, drenched in sweat. The book had fallen to the floor. He didn't move to pick it up. Instead, he pressed his hands to his face and sat in the darkness, the images still burning in his mind. The fire. The cry. The locket. The child. He didn't know what it meant, not fully. But it felt real. Not just dream but memory. As though some long-buried part of him had finally spoken. As though the past, long scattered in crumbs, was beginning to take shape again. Down the hall the bakery slept. Nara slept. And the ovens, as always, kept their quiet watch. The morning began like any other, with the dull pre-dawn glow slipping through the bakery shutters and the quiet hiss of the ovens coming to life. Nara was already up, dusting her hands with flour, her apron tied crooked at her waist. The air held that stillness just before the city woke, a silence too fragile to last. But today something pulled at her hands differently. She didn't follow Rennell's recipe. She didn't measure or weigh. Instead, she reached for ingredients instinctively, letting her fingers guide her through the motions. A touch of honey. A dusting of crushed coriander. The dough rose warm and pliant under her palms and she began to shape it, not into rolls or braids but something else. Something she hadn't planned. She pressed curves into the dough. Not just for beauty but for meaning. A looping spiral here. A split down the center. She folded the edges like wings and pinched a mark near the top. The design was strange but familiar, like something she'd seen in a dream or in the corners of old buildings. When she was done, she stared down at it and frowned. She hadn't meant to create a symbol, but there it was, unmistakable in the raw dough. She slid it into the oven alone. Rennell didn't appear until the scent began to drift through the shop. He came in rubbing his temples as though the night had weighed heavy on him. His eyes were shadowed with sleep or lack of it. "You're early," he said, nodding toward the counter. "Couldn't sleep," she replied. He moved behind her, reaching for a tray of scones but stopped mid-step. His eyes locked on the cooling rack beside her, the bread she'd just pulled from the oven. His breath caught. "What's that?" She looked down. "Just something I made. That design. It just came to me." Rennell stepped closer. The bread had cooled into a golden, domed shape, the patterns pressed into its top deeply baked in. The crest. He knew it instantly, though he hadn't seen it in over 30 years. The old seal of their district. A sun, split in 4 rays, over a hill crowned with wheat stalks. The symbol of the original guild bakery, burned down long ago. His family's bakery before the war and the famine, and the walls that rose around the richer quarters. Only a handful of city elders would even recognize the emblem now. But he did. It had been painted on the wall of his childhood home. Stamped on parchment. Etched into the wooden door of his mother's flower pantry. He stared at Nara. "How do you know that symbol?" She shook her head slowly. "I don't. Don't lie to me. I'm not." She swallowed. "It just happened. I was shaping it and I saw it in my head." He turned away abruptly and walked into the back room. She heard drawers opening, parchment rustling. When he returned, he held a scrap of old ledger paper, yellowed and torn at the edges. On it, the same crest had been drawn, in the same hand that had inked the lullaby. Nara's breath left her. "It was our family mark," Rennell said. "My mother's. She made every apprentice carve it into their first proper loaf. She said it meant warmth shared is never wasted." Nara's hands dropped to her sides. She looked suddenly pale. "You said your mother left you with a locket," Rennell said. "Let me see it again." She hesitated, then pulled it from beneath her tunic. The wood was warm from her skin, worn smooth at the corners. Slowly she unlatched it. The top side still held the scrap of melody. But something had shifted in the bottom compartment. The corner of the lining was loose. She pressed a thumb to it, and the fabric gave way. Beneath, tucked in a hidden slot, was a singed piece of parchment. Nara drew it out carefully. It was small, no larger than a coin, and browned at the edges from flame. On it was a faded imprint, the bakery sigil. Her hands shook as she turned it over. On the back, scrawled in faint ink, "For Na." The rest was missing, torn or burned away. But the handwriting was unmistakable. Rennell sank onto the stool beside the hearth, his hands dangling between his knees. "She named you Nara," he said. "Or maybe something longer. Nerea." Naren. Doesn't matter. She tried to mark it. To leave a trace. That's her writing. Nara sat on the floor, the locket and paper in her lap like relics of a temple lost. For a long while neither of them spoke. Finally she whispered, I think I used to dream of that symbol. Not clearly. Just firelight and bread. A door with the sun on it. That was our home, Reynolds said. Before it burned. Before she ran. I thought it was all gone. Nara looked at the loaf on the rack, still steaming faintly in the cool air. She baked like this, didn't she? Nara asked. She did, Reynolds said softly. But only my sister had hands like that. Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't the harsh silence of their early days. It was the silence of realization, of threads pulling tight. So I'm hers, Nara said. I think you are. And you're my uncle. He smiled faintly. Looks like it. She let the truth settle like flour in water. Strange at first, then inevitable. I should have seen it sooner, he muttered. You look like her. The stubbornness. The quiet way you walk into every room like you've already seen it in your mind. And the bread, Nara added. That's in us too. Yes. He chuckled softly. It is. He stood, walked over to the bread and cut 2 slices. He handed one to her. They ate in silence, chewing slowly. The taste was unlike anything either of them had ever made, rich, soft, touched with something ancient and familiar. Reynolds wiped a tear from his cheek and didn't hide it. You're not working off a debt anymore, he said. Nara looked up. You don't owe me anything, he continued. This is your place now. As much as it's mine. She didn't answer. She only nodded, not out of obedience but understanding. Outside, the sun finally broke through the clouds, casting a golden light across the flour-dusted floor. And in that quiet moment, with a loaf between them and a forgotten name half remembered, they began again, not as strangers but as kin bound by the oldest things. Bread, song, and the crumbs of love that never truly disappear. It was the kind of morning that wrapped the city in silver. Dew clung to the rooftops. The air was thick with the scent of river mist and something sharper, anticipation. Word had spread fast, too fast, faster than gossip usually dared in the old market lanes. The baker, proud, bitter Master Reynolds, had requested a public gathering. Not to sell, not to accuse, but to speak. The city gathered hesitantly. Old men with knees too stiff for standing leaned against the well stone lip. Children peeked out from behind apron folds. Vendors paused in stocking their carts. Even the magistrate sent a clerk in official red. There hadn't been a formal address in years, not since the war ended and the wheat tax was lifted. And at the center of it all, the bread stall. Cleaned, oiled, gleaming in the soft light. Behind it stood Nara, her apron clean, her shoulders drawn high. Beside her stood Reynolds. He looked older than yesterday. Not in body. His hands still bore the calluses of a man who shaped dough every day of his life, but in soul. Something about him had loosened, unraveled like old thread. His eyes were rimmed red. But he stood tall. When enough of the crowd had gathered, he raised one hand. I asked you all here, he began, because I wronged someone. Murmurs flickered. He waited. I wronged her, he said, turning slightly to Nara. You all saw it, some of you even cheered it. You saw a girl near my stall, a loaf missing, and you thought, thief. Because that's how we've learned to see the poor. He scanned the faces. Some lowered their eyes. Others stiffened, uncertain. But the truth is this, Reynolds said louder now. The bread was never stolen. It had fallen. Behind the stall. Between the crates. I found it the next morning. Damp. Uncut. A hush fell like ash. I didn't say anything, he admitted. Not then. I was too proud. Too sure of the story I already believed. That the hungry must also be dishonest. He turned fully to the crowd. But that's not the only truth I came to share. He motioned to Nara, who stood unmoving beside him. Her fingers were curled around the wooden locket beneath her apron, but she met the eyes of the crowd without flinching. You know her as the girl with empty pockets. The one who sings while she sweeps. Who offers a crust to someone worse off. Who never asks for thanks. He paused. But I know her now by another name. Silence complete. She is not a stranger. She is not a thief. She is family. A gust of wind tugged at the awnings. Somewhere a child coughed. She is my sister. The words dropped into the square like a stone into still water. A murmur rippled, then stilled again. Faces looked from one to the other, from Reynolds' lined jaw to Nara's familiar eyes. The likeness, once hidden by grime and distance, was suddenly clear. Reynolds continued. Decades ago my older sister, fled this city with child. There was a fire. A war. Chaos. She never returned. He turned to Nara. But she left something behind. Nara slowly untied the locket. She held it up for the crowd to see, the singed parchment within it, the faded crest, the half-name inked in a hand too delicate to be coincidence. She was left with nothing, Reynolds said. Not even her name. Only this. And a song. A tremor passed through his voice. The same lullaby my mother once sang to us both. No one in the crowd moved. She worked in my shop. She shaped bread like it was breathing. And still I didn't see her. Still I accused her. He dropped to his knees. Not out of performance, not with pride. But in grief. An apology. His apron brushed the stone. His hands rested flat on the market floor. I failed her, he said. I nearly destroyed the last piece of my own blood because I believed a lie we've all repeated too long, that the poor take and the rich keep. A long breath moved through the crowd. A shuffling of feet. Somewhere someone wiped their eyes. Others stood frozen in thought. She is no thief, Reynolds said. She is the heir of the flame that once lit this very square. She is my sister, and I kneel to her not because I must, but because I see her now. He looked up at Nara. She stood still. There was no triumph in her gaze. No smugness. Only something quiet, like the tail end of sorrow, and the first flicker of something else. She stepped forward. The crowd parted, letting her pass without resistance. She helped Reynolds to his feet, and for a long moment the two simply stood there, not as master and servant, not as accuser and accused, but as kin. The silence that followed was full. Oh. Then from the left edge of the crowd, a voice rang out. She gave my daughter soup when she was sick, said an old washerwoman. Didn't even ask for coin. She found my son when he was lost in the South Quarter, said another. She gave my brother her coat last winter. She sang to my grandfather when he was dying. She fixed my crutch. The stories tumbled, each from a different voice. A chorus of small kindnesses, ones too easily forgotten in the rhythm of daily hardship. Nara said nothing. Her eyes brimmed, but she did not let the tears fall. In the quiet that followed, the magistrate's clerk stepped forward. He cleared his throat. This recognition shall be formalized. The accusation voided. The record struck. But no one was looking at him. All eyes were on Nara, not with pity but awe. Not because of bloodline but because of truth. She was more than the sister of a baker. She was a girl who had survived alone in alleys that chewed up the forgotten. She was the one who gave when she had nothing to spare. She was the one who baked warmth into loaves. She was the real heir of the flame. And they saw her now, as she had always been, just hidden behind the smoke. Later that afternoon, the square emptied slowly. But the air felt lighter, changed. People walked past the bread stall and nodded at her. Not out of guilt, not out of gossip, but recognition. Inside the bakery, Reynolds moved slower, quieter. But when Nara reached for the flour bin, he placed a hand on hers. Let's make it together, he said. And they did. Two hands, once divided, now rising in the same rhythm. The smell of baking bread filled the market once more, but this time it wasn't just food. It was proof that what had been broken could be remade. That not all fires destroy. Some reveal. They didn't put up the sign right away. It sat propped against the wall in the back room for days, leaning like an old guest unsure whether it belonged. Painted in dark walnut stain, the letters were simple but strong. Sister's Crust. Reynolds had carved them himself. Every stroke of the chisel had been careful, deliberate. He didn't rush it, didn't want to. Names mattered, and this one more than most. It wasn't about nostalgia. It was about truth. It was about beginning again, not with the past erased, but honored. When the day came to hang it, Nara helped him. They stood side by side, holding the thick wooden board above the archway of the shop. The hammer slipped once in her hand, and they laughed, genuine and unforced. A few early passers-by stopped to look. Sister's Crust? A young boy asked. Is it named for her? No, Nara said, smiling. It's named for both of us. The name was more than a change of letters. It was a redefinition. They reworked the inside of the bakery too. Not everything but enough. The shelves were moved to open the space. Long benches replaced the stiff stools, and a broad table was set near the hearth, always with something hot on it. A fresh pot of barley stew, a plate of day-old rolls. No one who walked in hungry was turned away. They didn't advertise it. They didn't need to. Word travels differently when it's wrapped in warmth. At first, it was only a few regulars who came at odd hours: the widow from the South Quarter, the glassy-eyed man with too many coats and too few teeth, a pair of boys who never spoke but always came together. Then it grew. People who'd never dared step foot in a shop like Reynolds, too proud, too ashamed, too hungry, began to drift through the doors. Some asked to sweep the floor. Some tried to leave coins they couldn't spare. Reynolds refused none of them, but he didn't ask for anything in return. Instead, he'd nod, gesture to the big table and say, "There's space for you." It became more than a bakery. It became a kind of refuge. And not everyone liked that. The first noble to protest was Lady Avonlea, whose corset strings were as tight as her opinions. She sent a messenger, then a letter, then herself, entering the bakery one morning with the controlled dismay of someone inspecting damage. "This isn't a soup kitchen," she sniffed. "It's a business." Reynolds, dusted in flour and cinnamon, didn't even look up from kneading. "And we're doing more business than ever," he replied. "Feeding vagrants lowers the tone of the district. I'd rather raise the people than the tone." Nara emerged from the back with a tray of biscuits. She offered one without a word. Lady Avonlea declined and swept out, fuming. But the lines didn't shrink. They grew. Some came out of curiosity. Others out of need. But more came because the scent from Sister's crust wasn't just enticing, it was welcoming. The air inside was different. It didn't carry the sting of judgment or the clink of gold. It smelled like rising dough, like cloves and apples, like second chances. And Nara, once the barefoot girl behind the stalls, was now co-owner. Her name was on the wall. Her hands in every recipe. She didn't ask for permission to change things. She just did. She introduced honey oat loaves shaped like hearts for the winter festival. She mixed in spices no one had tasted in years. She created a bread that cracked open like a flower when baked, the blossom crust, children called it. But her biggest change came one cold morning, when two children hovered just outside the door. She saw them through the glass, one in a too big coat, the other holding the other's hand tight. She went to them. "You looking for something warm?" They didn't answer, only stared at her with suspicion earned too early. She smiled. "Come on in. The oven's still hot." They came. And she didn't just give them food. She gave them dough. She taught them to shape it, to press their fingers into it, to knead gently, not fight it, to wait for it to rise. Patience, she told them, is part of the flavor. And when they returned the next day, she welcomed them again. And again the day after. She didn't realize she'd started a school until the fifth child showed up, and the table was too small. So they made space. They used flour sacks as cushions, stacked crates as cutting blocks. The lessons weren't formal. There were no slates, no pens. Just dough and hands and care. She taught them to measure without scales, to listen for the sound of crust splitting in the oven, to smell the difference between nearly done and done enough. She taught them the same way the world had taught her, quietly, patiently, with attention. Some of them stayed. Others moved on. But all of them left with more than full bellies. They left with a skill, a rhythm, a place they'd once belonged. One girl, Mira, who hadn't spoken in weeks when she first arrived, whispered "thank you" one night as she shaped a honey loaf. Another, Bram, later returned with a small satchel of coin he'd earned helping a spice merchant, and offered it proudly for the sugar tin. "You don't have to pay," Nara told him. "I know," he said. "But I can." And that, she realized, was the point. Not charity. Dignity. Redemption not in grand gestures but in small ones. A meal, a name spoken with respect, a hand not raised in punishment but in invitation. Reynolds watched it all with a quiet reverence. He didn't try to take credit. He knew this was Nara's doing even if the bricks and beams were his. And as the months passed, he found he didn't mind the laughter in the back room or the way the new sign outside had faded slightly in the sun. The shop had once been a monument to his pain. Now it was a living place. One afternoon, a magistrate passed through incognito and tasted the winter crust. "I've never had anything like this," he muttered, licking a flake from his cuff. "That's because it wasn't meant to be just bread," Nara replied. "It was meant to be a story." The city began to shift slowly. Not everywhere, not overnight. But in small ways. A merchant left a bag of flour outside the bakery with no note. A widow from the upper tier sent in old recipe books for the children to learn. A teacher from the north side offered to read stories during baking lessons. And through it all, the smell of Sister's crust drifted across the city like a promise. Not just of food, but of return. Of what could be rebuilt from ash. Of what could rise again. Each loaf pulled from the oven was an act of memory, and an act of defiance. Against cruelty. Against judgment. Against forgetting. And at the table near the hearth, where anyone could sit, where broth was always warm and crust always fresh, Nara sometimes looked up from her work and smiled, not because everything was perfect but because everything had changed. And it all began with a girl who had once had nothing in her pockets but a song. The morning light fell gently across the worn wooden floors of Sister's crust. Dust motes danced in the beams that slid through the windows, catching in the soft warmth of flower clouds and the slow simmer of honey and spice. The bakery, though older now, still smelled like forgiveness. Nara sat by the hearth, her chair perfectly worn to her shape, the curve of her back nestled into its hollow like an old song remembered. Her apron was folded in her lap. Her hair, silver now, curled around her cheeks like strands of smoke. She wore her years without apology, they belonged to her the way the bakery did. Built one loaf, one kindness, one rising at a time. Children laughed near the long table, hands deep in dough. The youngest ones didn't know her as the girl from the alley, or the accused thief. They only knew her as Miss Nara, the woman who always had time, who smelled like nutmeg and earth, whose hands never rushed and whose eyes had a softness that made you want to tell the truth. She sat watching them, her fingers resting on the locket she still wore, the one burned at the edges, the clasp mended with care. She never took it off, not when baking, not when resting, not even during the years when merchants tried to replace it with something finer. "Why do you still wear that?" came a small voice. Nara looked down and met the eyes of a boy no older than 7, flowers smudged on his nose, his sleeves rolled up to elbows too small for the shirt he wore. His name was Leo. He'd arrived only 3 months earlier, a quiet boy from the eastern lanes, left on the doorstep with a bag of onions and a blanket. She smiled gently. "Because it reminded me I belonged somewhere," she said, "even before they remembered me." Leo blinked up at her. "Even when they said you didn't?" "Especially then," she said, touching the locket with her thumb. "It wasn't about them remembering. It was about me not forgetting." The boy frowned thoughtfully and looked toward the oven. "Will you teach me how to make the swirl buns today?" She nodded slowly. "Tomorrow. But I'll make something special tonight." He grinned and ran off reassured. Children always were. They trusted what she said. She never made promises she didn't keep. That evening, after the last customer had gone and the last crumb had been swept, Nara stood alone in the kitchen. The fire still flickered in the oven, steady and low. It felt good to move, her bones ached more these days, but her hands still remembered what they'd always known. She took down the special tin. The one lined with dried sage and filled with ingredients she rarely touched. The ones from the early days, the hard days. There was clove, lemon rind, and a single jar of dried wild lavender, saved for something that mattered. Her fingers moved with instinct. Flour, water, salt, and memory. She kneaded with the rhythm of the years, every push a lesson, every fold a moment. She added the spices slowly as if seasoning the past, binding it into something that could be tasted. The dough rose slowly and while it rested, she sat and watched the street outside. Sister's crust no longer shocked the city. It was a fixture now, its place cemented in the stone. Nobles came quietly, often late at night. Priests from the temple sent gifts each harvest. The magistrate's son volunteered each summer. Children who had once learned their first words over her loaves now returned grown, some with children of their own. The city had changed, not completely but enough. Enough that the idea of a girl being dragged through the streets for a missing loaf felt like something from a darker world. When the dough was ready, Nara shaped it gently. She didn't rush. The center she shaped into a heart, soft and full. Around it she curled arcs of dough that flared like petals. No, not petals, flames. Rising from the heart. Rising like the smoke from the bakery all those years ago. Like the song her mother sang. Like the fire that had once almost ended her, but hadn't. She glazed it with honey and set it into the oven. Then she sat again. Her fingers rested on the locket. Inside, the parchment was faded now. The ink barely visible. But she didn't need to see the letters to know what they had once spelled. She had lived them. She remembered Reynolds' face when he'd first seen the half-name, the moment he'd knelt in the street. He had passed on 5 years earlier, his heart giving out one late autumn morning. He'd died at the shop, arms dusted in flour, with no regret on his face. He'd left everything to her. But more than that, he'd left her something that couldn't be written in a will: peace. A full circle. A shared forgiveness neither had ever spoken aloud, but both had carried silently between them. The loaf finished baking just before midnight. She took it out gently, steam rising into the still air. She wrapped it in a soft cloth, not to preserve it but to carry it with care. She walked it to the front window and unwrapped it slowly, placing it on the sill, where the scent would drift into the sleeping streets. The heart and flame shone in the moonlight. She stood there for a long moment, her eyes tracing the cobbles beyond, the alley where she once slept, the corner where the bread had once gone missing. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. She went to bed with her locket still around her neck, her hands folded softly. And in the morning the bread was gone. No crumbs. No trail. Just the empty cloth folded neatly on the sill. The children found it first. They stood around the window in silence, their small hands pressed to the glass. "She baked it," Leo said. They nodded. None of them said the words they all felt. Not yet. But by noon word had passed through the entire market. That Nara was gone. That the flame had flickered out. That the locket had been found beside her bed, open and clean. And yet no one mourned with despair. They came to the shop in quiet lines, not for bread, but to stand at the table, to touch the old chair, to see the dented cups still on the shelf. They brought herbs and flour and apples and notes folded small with crooked writing. Thank you. I remember. The children baked that night. They shaped the loaves clumsy and rough, but they tried. Each one formed the shape of the flame. Not one of them burned. And Sister's crust stayed open, the oven still warm, the doors still wide. And the city still smelled, from time to time, of clove and lavender and something harder to name. Something like love baked slow. Something like a girl with empty pockets who never forgot where she belonged.